When people share from a place of abundance, such beautiful things can come forth and be birthed and grow that will outlive and sustain and last for generations.
We're talking about culture, legacy, ancestry. We're talking about reclaiming our knowledge systems. I think it is an abundant space.
Welcome, dear souls. Our next Members Soul Space is approaching on August the 9th, and we would love to see you there. If you are not a member yet, please know that your support is really at the heart of what we do, and it transforms this from a passive listener-creator experience into something that is dynamic and direct and reciprocal, and actually allows us to come together and to shift, to integrate, to heal together, which is really what this is all about, not just about creating spaces of information, but actually creating spaces where we grow and we evolve into ways that we can show up better for these times together. So if you'd like to join, you can visit allthatweare.org/support, and you'll find that there are different membership options there. It's offered on a sliding scale to make it accessible. And it really is our dream that everyone that listens to this regularly is part of the membership, and that your support en masse as a global community allows us to thrive as we make this for you. Many of you have been asking, and I can confirm that we will have a fresh round of beautiful leadership mentoring this autumn. The dates and more details will come soon, and this is the one-to-one work that I offer, which supports you in making deep and very personal shifts in your life. I do it online, so it's available for anyone wherever you are in the world. And we work with energy and with different rituals and practices and strategy, really so that you can come into much deeper relationship with yourself and the choices that you're making and the ways in which you're living your life, and tweak it so that it is more beautiful, that you are leading your life in a more beautiful and radiant way. This week's episode is a special one that I recorded in Ubud, Bali, at a beautiful and special space called Lineage, which opened earlier this year. Lineage was birthed from a dream our ancestors dreamt and bestowed us in the here and now, where our paths have crossed. Lineage is the current that runs through our blood and carried us forth from places long forgotten, erased from the maps and minds of our time. Lineage is a space of cultural comfort on Sanginam Road in Ubud, where art, literature, tradition, and philosophies are weaved from past to present. In our library cafe, we foster workshops and circles that explore how to live in reciprocal relationship with the land and cultures, while our shala is a platform for people of origin to teach and share their wisdom. Given that cultures in the global south share the experienced neo-colonial appropriation of sacred traditions, we felt the need to call people in instead of out by showing alternative ways in which we can practice with reverence and awareness. In the process of birthing Lineage, we revived and reimagined ancient trade routes between Africa, India, and Bali that thrived long before colonization through an abundant exchange of knowledge, spirituality, flavors, fabrics, and gold. And so these are words that were written by the founders. There are 3 female founders of Lineage, and we are joined by 2 of them here. Mallence Bart-Williams, who you will know from episode 24, a Sierra Leonean-German multi-facetted social entrepreneur who uses film, fashion, botanical alchemy, writing, and philanthropy as forms of expression to instill balance in this world. She's co-founder of Lineage, founder of Folarancho, Female Innovation Lab, Ethical Minerals, Asar Healing Sanctuary, Natural Body Care Limited, The Secret Garden, Secret Ceres. In 2019, she was awarded the African Economic Merit Award as Woman of the Year for her continuous efforts and vision to create a brighter Africa. Due to her cross-cultural roots, Mallence perceives herself as a bridge connecting two vastly different worlds. Her diverse background enables her to see creative solutions to common problems. Through her work, Mallence connects cultural contrast, enabling unique synergies that yield action-driven results. She pursued her studies in economics and finance in Paris, Singapore, and Great Britain. Today, she lives across the globe, produces a holistic alchemy body care line in Asia with a special focus on womb wellness. In her TEDx Berlin Change Your Channel talk, Mallence shared a truth that deeply resonated with people across the globe, and many felt compelled to share. Change Your Channel not only served as an eye-opener, but also raised the bar of the widespread status quo in regards to Africa's representation and its perception globally. It has become an integral part of academic curricula of universities and high schools in Africa, Europe, Asia, and the Americas, as a timeless piece of essential truth that will be recognized by generations to come. Mallence serves on the Council of the Elders of the Asiri University, Africa's first online university, offering an entirely African curriculum rooted in the continent's ancient sciences and wisdom technologies, as a means to resurrect the core of African identity, the African genius. Shilo Shiv Suleman is an award-winning Indian artist whose work lives and breathes at the intersection of magical realism, art, technology, and social justice. Her work is unapologetically embodied, weaving together the sensual and sacred, past and future, through paintings, wearable sculptures, interactive installations, and public art interventions. Her collaborations with a neuroscientist on creating art that interacts with your brainwaves and other biofeedback sensors made her recipient of several grants, including the honorarium installation Pulse and Bloom at Burning Man. She's been featured on TED, BBC, Rolling Stone, MSNBC, TechCrunch, The Guardian, Wired, and has exhibited her work at the South Bank Centre in London and the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam. Her newest body of work, Semi-Precious, explores the forces of nature, rivers and mountains, the movement of tectonic plates, wind currents, photosynthesis, rocks, moss, minerals, and all kinds of invisible and microcosmic and macrocosmic love stories. She is also a founder of Lineage. In this episode called Lineage of Abundance, we explore the themes of embodied decolonisation, sensuality, and cultural reclamation as we speak to the question, how do we decolonise and reclaim the sensuous powers of our divine feminine? In this conversation, we explore insights and stories revealing their personal cultural lineages and ancestral practices, cultural appropriation and capitalism of ancestral practices such as yoga, cultural regeneration and how to reclaim our sensuous power of the divine feminine, culture of shame and colonial laws of oppression that continue to reap hate and division in our communities, joy as a form of resistance and reclamation. We hope that this episode allows you to see and experience the world through a different lens. Welcome to All That We Are, with me, your host, Amisha Gadiali. On this show, we explore the weave between activism, the sacred, creativity, and regeneration, the spaces where our inner and outer worlds dance. From healing trauma to nature connection, to new technologies to ancient wisdom, it's time for us to move beyond silos and into an integrated way of being. Every one of us has ideas and personal experiences to share that can lead us to a more beautiful future. Despite the challenges we face as a global community or the pressures we meet in our daily lives, when we stop and dare to listen, to ask ourselves the big questions, and to share what we are already doing and envisioning, we create the futures of our wildest dreams. And we begin to embody all that we are becoming, and all that is possible. I am delighted to be here with Mallence and Shilo here in Lineage in Ubud, in Bali. And so to get us going, I would love for each of you to share with me, what are the futures of your wildest dreams? And you can answer that in a personal or a collective way, or a bit of both, whatever that sparks for you. Would you like to go first?
Sure, absolutely. When I think about what was colonized, of course, our land was taken away from us, our culture was decimated in many ways. But I think the biggest colonization was perhaps the colonization of the imagination. When I look back at our people, we were living our wildest ancestral dreams. You know, the Mughal tombs, the incredible temple structures that we have across the country, the texts, the mathematics, the philosophy, that was our ancestors' dreams. And so for me, it's been part of my work is to actually build upon those ancestral dreams. So my practice is split in two, and now I guess three with this space. But on one hand, I am a visual artist. And so a lot of my work, as you can see up on the walls, is about cultural perpetuity. How do I build upon the dreams of my ancestors and also decolonize a lot of the way that art is looked at within traditional Western worlds and circles. So I make sculptures, installations. I do a lot of work with technology as well, on one hand. And on the other hand, I run a not-for-profit called Fearless, and we work with communities of women at the front lines of different resistance movements across the world, and actually enable them to also begin to dream, to imagine what exists beyond the crisis, what exists beyond the pain or the trauma. I feel like my wildest ancestral dream would be a reclamation of what has been lost and a vision of what we can be.
Mallence, what do you feel when you hear that question?
I agree with Shilo that basically an ancient future is what I see, you know, and when we really travel into the past and see it so vividly, you know, in all its glory and all its colors and all its cultures and facets, and understand that there was such an abundant exchange from a place of like abundance and knowledge and intellect and spirituality. And that for me is my wildest dream for the future, that we can coexist in harmony, deeply anchored into the practices, and more so than rooted, actually become these gods and goddesses, you know, reclaim the Godhead within us and live from that place. Because I believe when we look at the creations of our ancestors, when we look at these glorious temples in India, when we look at the glorious monuments in Africa, we know that Godheads created that, you know. I think this is where we have diverted, you know, through colonization. Of course, we were indoctrinated. We have forgotten who we truly are. You know, we came from the stars, and let's aim for heaven, you know. And India and Africa will make up 50% of global population in a few decades. And that gives me enormous hope. It's not to know it's not just an imagination. It's a very proximate reality, you know, because we all draw from our ancestral wisdom, our ancestral practices very much. They're very much ingrained in the Indian culture. They're very much ingrained in the African culture. And considering that we will make up half of the global population, I know a lot of the future's thought process will be informed by our ancestral practices.
Powerful.
I guess also what's interesting about our timelines is that they're not linear. So sometimes the more you go back into your past, you cyclically arrive at the future.
You want to share a bit more about how you experience that?
With cultures where we live in cycles, you know, we begin and then we end and we reincarnate into something new. So I think there is a way that perhaps, I think especially when I look at like, you know, this idea of the world ending in many ways, our culture and our mythology reminds us that it always begins again. Perhaps in many ways there was an ending, a softer end of our world as our kingdoms became into somebody else's empire. But there is a rising. I'm seeing a resurgence with Black people, with Indigenous people, with South Asian communities across the world. And I feel like there is a cycle that perhaps needed to happen.
What do you mean by it needed to happen?
Like the world as we know it needs to come to an end. That often, you know, it's like when whether it's the Bible or any spiritual text often speak about endings. It means as we know it, the world as we know it, and in order for something new to spring forth and arise, sometimes the world as we know it needs to end. And sometimes these things are inspired or brought into existence by certain events. Of course, we all experienced COVID globally. On the flip side of it, it pushed us into a mental evolution because number one, we all had the time to really reflect and go inward, and a lot of things that no longer needed to be came to the surface and were ejected. And so I feel as much as this was a violation of our sovereign authority as human beings, I also know on the flip side, it ignited our spiritual self and our Godhead further collectively.
Jotima, who she convened the Council of the Indigenous Grandmothers, and she always says the ending is falling into the beginning.
Yes, that's beautiful way.
Absolutely. Yeah. All cultures have creation stories, right? And why I love the idea of a creation story is because you're not just tethered to your grandmother or your grandfather, but you're tethered all the way to the beginning of time. And it also helps place you in theological perspective with the rest of the earth. And one of the many creation stories that we have, because our worlds in India have ended and begun again many times, is the story of Yama and Yami, which is very similar to the Adam and Eve story, but quite different. So it goes that one day Yama and Yami, who were first man and woman, were wandering the earth eternal. And at some point, Yami had this kind of desire creep over her. And she looked at him with, long eyelashes. And she said, maybe be together. Can we be together? And Yama was shocked. It's like, you're like a sister to me. Refused her. In refusing procreation, Yama becomes into Yamraj, the god of death. And Yami became into the Yamuna river, kind of turned into water because of this rejection, and became into the Yamuna river and crept her way across the Indian subcontinent, fertilizing the fields until she finally found the feet of Lord Krishna and became into his beloved. But why I love that story is because it reminds us that rejection can turn you into a river, and that the world can begin with a woman's desire and fertilize the fields. So we have so many stories like that speak to not only creation, but the continuous recreation of our worlds.
And also the death, the internal death that comes with rejection. Number one, we have this almost a very similar narrative and story in West Africa, with Jemuna, the water goddess, Jemjai, from the Orishas and the Yoruba tradition. But I feel what Shilo just said, the rejection of procreation, and he turned into the Lord of Death, right? And when I look at European culture presently across the globe, their own rejection of procreation and also their effort to control other cultures' procreation, especially India and Africa, through masked as vaccines supposed to protect people, laced with sterilization agents.
Fear around climate change and growing populations as well. But it's also even just the rejection of life, culture, beauty, glory, sensuality. That rejection is also death in its own way. And you can see it, where we come from, our houses were made of limestone, of mud, of leaves. They were living.
The earth, yeah.
And now we live in cement boxes, which is also death in its own way. So perhaps we do have to, our cultures do have to form mighty rivers and bring life back into our space.
I know ultimately they will, because when you really look at it, just when you look at the statistics, how certain cultures are dwindling and doing everything in their power to seize procreation, doing everything in their power to seize procreation. We see a growing trend of people who no longer wish to procreate, who literally amputate the organs that allow them to procreate, their sexual organs, take them out, mutilate them, and so on for whatever reasons. That's ultimately your own self-proclamation of death. However, that proclamation of death allows something else to flow into a mighty river, into the oceans, into that water, which ultimately bears life.
Mallence, can you share a bit around your journey as an artist and a creator and an activist, and what has brought you here into this collaboration?
I would definitely say my ancestors have brought me into this creation. I was born artistic since I was a little girl. I could have easily become an artist. It would have been probably the most evident and natural evolution or path. I chose something very conventional, which was finance and economics. No regrets. It helps me today in many, many ways. However, in whatever I do, there is that it's informed by art, by art and spirit, which ultimately is the same. And my grandmother's lineage, this is also ultimately what's so beautiful. It connects Shilo's ancestors and mine. My grandmother's lineage is from the Malian Empire, which was one of the greatest in Africa. And there was a sub-queenum called Mallence, and my grandmother's great-grandmothers ruled it. Matriarchal rulership was very common across the African continent. We also have it in East Africa, Nubia, and Kemet, and so forth. Punt, very famous and amazing queens that ruled. It's unfortunately, we don't share these stories enough. And that's also the reason why I find myself here, because I'm a product of these amazing women attempting to live up to the standards that they set and injected into my blood, my DNA. And so that's my grandmother's lineage. And at the time, this empire would trade with the empire that her father comes from, the temples of South Kerala, and they would trade gold in exchange for wisdom, for Vedic wisdom and poems and science, that it was all informed by spirit. And to this day, these exchanges have informed so much. Just, I think 5 years ago, there was a temple vault opened by chance, discovered by chance, and had over $1 trillion worth of jewels and gold and so on, and the majority of that gold could be traced back to the Malian Empire because they had exchanges that lasted for centuries, And for me, that's such a testimony, and it informs so much of what we are doing here today with Lineage. When people share from a place of abundance, such beautiful things can come forth and be birthed and grow that will outlive and sustain and last for generations. Like what Shilo was saying, that time isn't necessarily linear. I would say so many things are timeless, because these things, this have been dormant in that vault for hundreds and hundreds of years and suddenly was discovered. But gold is timeless. Diamonds are timeless. The wisdom, the Vedic texts, these astronomers, this African astronomy, all that is timeless. That's not something that's going somewhere. It's not a trend. It's not, has no expiration date. It's not decomposing. The gold, the jewels are as shiny and as glorious and as important in today's time. And we don't debate the value. It hasn't vanished. And this is also a reason why we're here. I truly believe our ancestors have woven this path for us, how we met, and in Egypt and in Kemet, where I had this beautiful sanctuary up at the temple of Hassar. And it was a very, that meeting has informed so much, of our journey together, our co-creation together, the conversations we've had together, and finally deciding, instead of, calling these things out, let's call people into our ancient traditions and ways and beautiful offerings, and show people how it can be done differently, not in what we often see, the extortion, the exploitation, the rape, the theft, and unfortunately it's still being done with nowadays with spiritual practices, because Westerners have realized they can commodify spirituality, now it's of value, especially in India, what we see here, and especially in Bali around us, what's been done to yoga and Hinduism and Buddhism. And, in Africa, they're doing the same now with the things that they can actually grasp, and it becomes a ratatouille of spiritual practices that are butchered, that took thousands of years and millennia and generations upon generations to create and develop and hold and pass on from generation to generation. And it takes a Western person, a European person, 3 weeks to butcher it up, repackages, and become a self-proclaimed teacher and master and what's so on, And we we wish to invite people into this space in order to allow those that only know that particular way to reapproach and readdress it and understand that in our cultures, we are students. We are not teachers. We're not masters. We definitely are not self-proclaimed masters of any sort or form. We don't proclaim ourselves these titles. Yeah, it's in the way we live. It's in the way we be. It's like when I look at my lineage, Mallence is a title, right? It also happens to be my name, but the crown, and in Western cultures, you would wear the crown as a decor. For me, the crown is a heavy responsibility towards my people. You know, it's not an easy thing. The crown is heavy. It's not a decor. You know, that's not how we were raised. You know, I feel it's about that time. More and more people becoming open to new ways and new forms, and those who are, we wish to embrace them and call them in instead of calling them out.
How would you explain the vision for Lineage?
Again, kind of going back into my past so that we can envision a future. My career kind of took off when I was 21. I'd been working on a series of new media narratives for children on the iPad at that point, which I gave a TED talk about, which at that point, you know, at all of 21 with a floppy flower in my hair. Suddenly my life sort of exploded. I was at, you know, the Wired conference, speaking alongside Yoko Ono, DLD, doing world tours. But even back then, without even having the vocabulary that I do or the politics that I do around decolonization now, it was very clear and very present to me that I wanted to see how an Indian or South Asian identity could find its way in digital spaces. So again, without the vocabulary, without any of the politics behind it, which I now have, it still felt very present as a mission. As I was circling around the globe, I found myself on the streets in 2012 at a protest following the gang rape of Jyoti Singh Pandey. That led me to actually come from the stars back down to the pavement. And for the last 10 years, while having my own art practice that is, like I said, rooted in decolonization, it is about looking at art as not an aesthetic or decorative object, but actually a living, breathing, sacred object of worship for me. So there's the personal practice, a lot of work with art and technology continues on one hand, but on the other hand, also I have been at the front lines of different resistance movements, be it Shaheen Bagh in India, during the CNRC protests, or most recently I was in Sri Lanka during the economic crisis at the front line of Gota Gogama. Being with people who are most invisible and most marginalized, right? Not even talking about now the kings and the queens, I'm talking about people who are completely invisible to the rest of society, has made me feel like the work that needs to happen is both an internal battle as well as an external battle. Within Africa, within India, there's a lot that needs to be uprooted and cleansed internally, but also there is an external battle when we look at current global power structures. So for me, Lineage is a space to really reclaim that power. As someone who grew up in India, when I walk around on the streets in Ubud, and I've been coming here for a good 10 years. Part of the reason why I've also been coming here is, as you probably know, Hinduism in India right now is currently extremely fundamentalist, extremely violent. And so Bali became into a space where I could reclaim my relationship with Hinduism in a softer, more fragrant, more delicate way. But simultaneously, it also really irked me to see the way that our traditions were being appropriated, were being sold back to us. Everything from the ratatouille, as she calls it, khichdi, as I call it, the khichdi of yoga.
It's also when people say it's called kitchery, and I'm like, no, it's not.
It's called khichdi. Khichdi, yeah. But yeah, seeing the kind of appropriation of, and not only the appropriation, but also the capitalization of our culture, it hurts. Not only does it hurt, it also kind of ruins it for us. Like mantras, they're mantras, and they have been passed on, and sometimes they're secret. Sometimes you don't even get to proclaim it into the streets or into a yoga studio, or even actually the idea of yoga studios. Like in India, we never had yoga studios. It wasn't something, sounds like a Starbucks. Dear yogi, you gave up everything. You gave up your name, your place. You went up into the mountains and you chanted the name of the Lord. And what I also appreciate about the spectrum of diversity within Indian culture is that if you wanted to be a yogi, you could. If you wanted to be a householder, you could. If you wanted to be a devdasi who served the Lord through her body and through sensuality and sexuality, you could. There was always a way that was completely dependent on you. We have the concept of a Ishta Devta, which is your chosen deity. So each family or each person has the ability to be able to even choose who created you. What a power that is, to be able to choose your own creator. Coming here, like I said, it ruins it for us, because I no longer really, I don't want to be in a yoga class listening to Coldplay. I don't want to pay a lot of money for some chai tea, latte, turmeric, something. I want lineage. I want the source. I want authenticity. And when we talk about authenticity, we're not doing it in a purist way at all. On one side of my lineage, like Mallence mentioned, my father's lineage has tended to a temple in Kerala, in Kannur, for millennia. From as long as, our family line existed, we have taken care of this temple in Kannur to the mother goddess, to Bhagwati. And so they're temple keepers on one hand. And on the other hand, my mom's side, which is Muslim, comes from the wandering Lohars of Rajasthan, who were nomadic gypsy tribes. And they actually say that all gypsy culture began in the deserts of Rajasthan and kind of moved across to Europe. And as they moved, music changed and everything changed. So I'm not being purist about this space in any way, because I think that the culture has always had the ability to be able to breathe and expand. My own identity is informed both by my Muslim side as well as by my Hindu side, very much so. So with this space, we really want to create that room for reciprocal, equal exchange, but a tethered exchange.
So before we dive deeper into this space, I'm curious, what you share around the turmeric lattes and the yoga classes. And they are doing something that is quite beautiful. Mm-hmm. Like, people are having profound experiences through having these practices become part of their lives, mm-hmm. even though it's not complete mm-hmm. and whole. I'm curious as to how you feel around that, mm-hmm. Because I feel like the language of yoga that is now a fluency mm-hmm. across the Western world mm-hmm. has definitely brought some level of insight and perspective mm-hmm. that wasn't there before it. Mm-hmm. There's a long way to go for something that is more integrated, authentic, wholesome, and decolonial.
I think people can have profound experiences doing anything, really, in all honesty. It's like if someone is so thirsty and you offer them a sip of water, that sip is going to satiate you for a little while. But we have an ocean. So, yes, I'm sure that the goji berry latte, whatever it is, it's doing something. But first of all, who's offering that to you? And second of all, what else exists? What more exists? I think the depth of immersion is super important. And again, this is why I say this is not a purist space. We're not saying that if she's African now she can't wear a sari, or I can't touch her hair. Can I touch her hair? This is not a purist kind of space. It is about equal exchange. But I think that first of all, what bothers me about it is that a lot of the colonizers first actually disregarded these traditions. We were called barbaric, we were called native, we were called heathen, pagan, all kinds of things, and now have taken it from us and are selling it back to us. So I think there's something deeply problematic about that. And if people are having profound experiences, then
I think it's also the what is important, but the how is important too. It's not so much about what you're doing, but how you're doing. There are ways to do certain things, right? And Westerners, as she said, they were calling us barbaric, and even outruling. It was punished when certain cultures practiced their traditional practices, be that the Native Americans, Africans, and Indians weren't allowed to practice. Punished, So the moment it became a business, that's when people are having extreme, profound experiences. So let's be very honest. The extreme, profound experiences are attached to a lot of money. A lot of people can have a profound experience when it's $1 trillion industry now, yoga, right? And in Indian and African context, you will not find a single authentic sadhu that charged people for teaching spirituality. It's unheard of. Yeah, unheard of in our culture.
I mean, it's actually the opposite of yogic culture. Yogic culture is to release, to renounce, you know, it's not to monetize.
And Shilo
own your worth and have 7 figures because you're an expert.
Yeah, it's very much
industry,
attached.
the yoga pants and
the yoga pants, Lululemon. I mean, they're publicly traded companies that didn't exist, and the anti-yoga porn that evolved out of that, where again, young women, because it's acrobatics. You're not doing anything here spiritual, so you're now giving a title to acrobatics that you can commercialize, right? It's acrobatics, and acrobatics wouldn't have gotten you that far, and because it has that spiritual connotation, they feel it's okay to bend over backwards and forwards and sideways in their leggings and make it about, oh, I'm spiritual, I'm just doing it to show what gives you these profound experiences. No, you're not. You're deeply in your ego. You want to show off your body and make others feel probably way more insecure about it. I mean, do it, but don't take something from a sacred culture and label yourself in that way. And that's the problem I'm having with it. You can bend yourself all type of ways, but don't attach it to Indian culture. Don't attach it to Africa. You can wear kaftans, but don't pretend you're now Isis floating around with some imaginary wings, you know? It's like, do wear kaftans, do whatever you want to do, but don't rub our cultures that our ancestors kept and upheld and tended to for millennia, because now there's a dollar sign attached to it. That's the problem I'm having. Have your profound experiences. And also, why can you not have a profound experience with your Gaelic traditions and wherever you came from? Yeah, because that's actually work, because you guys didn't tend to it. So you're coming here with people, again, because the free labor is a very colonial concept. So you're taking all that free labor that was put in for several thousands of years, and you want to put the dollar sign to it, but you're coming and checking. So it's just slavery revamped, to me personally, where I have ancestors that were sold and labored for free to build entire nations, okay? And this is the same thing. It was built for millennia, and you're coming and attaching dollar signs to it and actually pushing those who created it out of it. I had a friend who was from Iraq. He looks very much like, could it be Shilo's brother? He would not get a job in a yoga studio, even though he's a yogi, right?
I've been through that in England.
Yeah. Or they paid less than the blonde, blue-eyed Lululemon with her sexy outfit and a water bottle that costs $100 and a yoga mat from plastic. I mean, the idiocracy. You want to root and connect to the earth, but you put isolation in between? Like, no, do basic physics before you want to study spirituality, girl. You know, do primary school physics and just understand how electricity and conductivity works before you want to teach anything, right? And also, what really freaking pisses me off, I'm half German, right? So the most basic degree, let's say, it's a nail esthetician or cutting hair. This is basic stuff, cutting hair. It takes probably a year or longer before you can practice. So how in 3 weeks can you become a self-proclaimed master or teacher of anything? You can't become a kindergartner in 3 weeks, right? So now you want to teach a millennia-old practice after 3 weeks of learning it, but in your own country, that don't fly. That just not, it doesn't. So the hypocrisy, you can have a profound experience, but let me tell you why. Because now you could be lazy. This is giving you an excuse to be lazy. That's why you're having a profound experience, because you can chill and relax. You can suddenly charge without doing any work. And that's profound for any of us. I'm going to have a profound experience if I go home and lay down. You know, it's profound for me, relaxing. And if I get paid while relaxing, guess what? I'm having a profound experience. You know, so it's like, no, we need to really like put it as it is and strip away all this hula baloo and your.
And I would also add, you know, like we can see our beautiful yogis here on the wall who have given up their name, given up their place, lived in the mountains and chanted their Lord's name. And we see that being completely
erased,
for the lack of a better word. But on the other side, I also want to speak for a minute about the colonization of sensuality, this other end of the spectrum, because like I said, India has enough room to hold everything, right? And there are 1,000 ways to be able to kneel and touch the ground. So if you wanted to be a householder, you could. If you wanted to be a yogi, you could. And if you wanted to live a life of sensuality and desire, you also could. I mean, it's funny that neither of us are wearing sari blouses right now, because the sari blouse is a Victorian invention. It didn't exist. We just used to wear our blouses. That's also why there's no real word for blouse. Or the petticoat is, which I'm also not wearing, and neither are you. Petticoat is also a Victorian invention. We have traditions, the Devdasi tradition that I mentioned as well, where the body was the way to the Lord. Sensuality, the eroticism was the pathway. And that was also erased. And that was also made into brothels. You know, these were keepers, the Tawaiffs and the Devdasis were keepers of India's sensual traditions. And now when I talk about sensuality, I'm not talking about sex the way that the West talks about sex.
We're not talking about neo-tantra.
We're not talking about neo-tantra. We're not even talking about penetration. We're talking about sensuality. We have a couple of books by Kalidasa in there, and his Katha Sarita Sagara, his translation by Tagore, is absolutely, absolutely stunning. What begins as a lover's touch turns into a description of a drop of dew touching a leaf, turns into the description of a hummingbird nestling its beak into a flower. So our sensuality, yes, it began in the body, but it actually extended into the natural world completely, right? We were talking about like creation stories earlier, and that sensuality was everywhere. It wasn't something that was just about one partner or sex at all. The kajal underneath our eyes is our sensuality. The way we perfume our bodies and our wrists, that is part of that sensuality. And all of that was also decimated. It was made into whorehouses, right? A lot of the laws that we currently have in India, even around dancing, there was a weird time in Bangalore a couple of years ago where they were trying to shut down dance bars in Bangalore, right? And so they turned upon this old colonial law that said that if women were dancing with live music, and this is now many years after the British have left, if women were dancing with live music, then they're prostitutes. So we used to go to clubs in Bangalore, and I'm talking about like 2005, 2006, and we couldn't dance in public spaces because cops would come up to us and say, please stop dancing. The colonial laws, like the two-finger test in India, for example, these are something
What is that two-finger test?
If a woman had come into a police station to say that they had been sexually assaulted, a medical practitioner, according to British law, would have to stick two fingers up their body to see if they were accustomed to sex. And if they had been accustomed to sex, it devalued their case.
Word.
Yeah. The two-finger test was abolished as of actually during the Nirbhaya protests, that recently.
When was that?
10 years ago.
Wow. So until then it was practiced.
10 years ago. So a colonial law is still preventing women who are being raped in India to be able to get basic access to justice. And the shame is still embedded in it. And that is not shame we had. That is not our shame.
Thank you for sharing that, because I don't think many people realize quite the depth of how colonization is still such a part of cultures.
Mm-hmm.
It's
and
often,
the mindset.
And all of our mindsets, even if we come from these cultures. You know, I was born into the belly of my own beast. And so I spend my life in England, often in spiritual circles, where we're all calling in our ancestors. And I'm processing the trauma of my ancestors right next to those that are processing the trauma of their ancestors as the colonizers. And it's wild.
It's wild.
And it's really not that long ago. My parents were born into colonized India, only just, but they were. And so then my grandparents lived colonized India. So I was in the womb of my grandmother in colonized India. And here we are. And we talk about it as if it is something of the past.
I think the problem is that we do not talk about it. It's been swiped under the carpet. We only hear in Africa, we have this saying, unless the lion tells its story, we hear only about the glory of the hunter. And it's time for the lion to share their stories and their perspectives. And it's uncomfortable. It's going to be uncomfortable for many, especially Western people get very uncomfortable. They're present in these conversations, but we have been through. Uncomfort isn't even the right word. We've been carrying atrocities over so many generations. So it's so important we talk about it. It's been around the corner. Just 2 days ago, actually, on the day of our opening, the woman, I forgot her name, but she was responsible for Emmett Till. It's now something that sparked the civil rights movement in the US and in full force and form. The boy went into a store and she claimed he raped her, right? And he was executed at 16 years old. She just passed 3 days ago, that very woman, and that pushed a lot of people like Malcolm X and so on really, really, really to the forefront. So this is our life. During our lifetime, these people are around. These people are paving, cultures and ways and forms of thought and so on within the same spaces as us, within the same conscious spaces as us. So it's not like, hey, this was, this story is long gone by. No, this is alive.
It's alive. I would even say, I just mentioned the CA and RC protests in India and the Shaheen Bagh movement. What is currently happening between Hindus and Muslims, that's also a British thing. Partition was British. The seeds of hate between communities, it was their parting gift to us to say that, okay, yes, you can be self-sovereign now, but you will continue to live with this curse of hate inside of your bodies forever. And we still feel it. I went to Pakistan for 2 weeks and there are no separations between our culture and theirs. I'm half Hindu, half Muslim. It never mattered, and now it matters. And that is 100 years later. It still matters. And the kind of violence that we see, that was not seeded by us. So I want to say, please take it back. Please take it back.
And that's so difficult.
Yeah.
That's so difficult because now it's inside of us. It's growing inside of us. It's growing through our generations. And even that was carefully crafted. Identities were taken and replaced by other thought forms that never mattered in the past. Yeah, language. So it's going to be like a long work or process of work that we have to do because nature is taking care of the rest. This is gradually vanishing, and kind of also what she talked about, this rejection of procreation ultimately is setting your path for extinction. But we have internalized so much, and that is what we have to unearth. That's what we have to decolonize our own minds. These conversations are important. Whilst we cannot dwell in the past, it's important to process it and so on, aim of creating a beautiful future.
And I would add to that, I would say that this is really not about the pain. Like for us, this space is not about the pain. We have to deal with the pain, there's no doubt. But this is really about the power of our people, the insane amounts of beauty that continues to exist. And it's about protecting that. And I think the British way was divide and conquer. And for us, we are reuniting and creating and recreating. Yeah.
And that mentality of divide and conquer, I grew up as a child in England, and that it's just a saying of like, things need to be done. Right, let's divide and conquer. And kids divide and conquer all the time. And you can see that is in the dominant culture and mindset. And we have experienced it so much through the pandemic, we experience it through every day, that's how the othering that exists. And so tell us now about this space and the beauty and the unity that you're bringing us into an experience here. And so for those listening that are not able to see the visual, we are in a beautiful temple space on a busy, bustling road in Ubud, which speaks to these cultures. It speaks to that experience of vibrancy, of chaos, of multi-generations around and life happening in all of its beautiful ways, in there being space for everything to be seen and felt and be part of our reality. You have made this space so incredibly beautiful. There are books here all over in these incredible shelves. There is the paint and the detail here on the walls, the shapes of the archways, the beautiful art that is here, and an experience that is like coming home. I walked into this space not knowing what I was fully coming into, and I walked in, and there was a beautiful Indian woman singing to Saraswati as I entered. And I felt this like, oh, I'm home. And my whole body just relaxed. And I looked around and I felt the beauty that is here. And I felt the power of our cultures.
Definitely, it was our intention to make it like an extension of us. When you walk into her space, it will feel like that. When you walk into my space, I mean, this sofa was from my home and so on. So this is literally an extension of us, and the beauty you see is literally the inner temple that we release to the outside world and manifest through our outer spaces. As I said before, it's calling people in to our space, whilst we're going to have very honest conversations here to speak about the truth, to normalize the truth, to make the truth more comfortable. It's not about calling people out, it's about calling people in. And I think there was a very descriptive encounter that our third co-founder had with a woman who said, who is your target audience? Who are you targeting? And she just said, we're not targeting. And it was somebody from Europe. She said, we're not targeting anybody. We're just offering, And I think that describes it so well. We're not targeting nobody. We're just being, in our own juices and this is just us. So the library is kind of a collection of our personal books. We brought books. I brought books from my father. Shilo brought books in India. Some books were hand-bound. We really intentionally curated this library, and presently we have around 250 titles, 80 to 90% voices and authors from the global south, that ultimately make up 80% of global population, but don't really control the narrative, or don't really, their narrative is not as known and widespread. And we wish to expand this library, to around 1,000 books. Then you'll see everything here filled. And people were asking us, so what do we have to do to read these books? And we said, hey, you can read them for free, and we will extend and expand and so on, because that's ultimately what our ancestors did. When you think of Mansa Musa, you would pay a poet a kilo of gold, to buy his poetry. Or the Vedas, they were paying in with these precious minerals, and people ask us, wow, this is a lot. We're spending tens of thousands of dollars on books, but that is really knowledge is gold, in my culture.
And also, while we're talking about abundance and wealth, let's also talk about the fact that the British left us $44 trillion in debt, which is a very significant amount. I can even see how sometimes these political histories do really inform our personal histories, because my great-grandfather or my grandfather, who actually went for some of Gandhi's talks and marches, Mallence and Suleman, he went from being a lohar in a village outside of Piragpura, Jaipur, to one of the biggest iron and steel merchants in Madhya Pradesh. And that was, in that generation, it was like you were starting from, not just from ground zero, you were starting $44 trillion in debt, right? So you see a lot of the generational narrative being, we have to build India up. We have to make India rise. Then there was my father's generation, who suddenly now, with global influences, MTV, access to travel, they found themselves kind of with a renewed self-loathing. They were all trying to speak English. My dad's entire life plan was that he needed to go abroad. He would have rather worked for a German company or worked for a Chinese factory than he would tend to our family temple, which is thousands of years old. Right? There was a deep self-loathing in a generation of men who wanted to go outside because that's what the dream was. But I am feeling like we are brewing an incredible resurgence movement where we are coming back home through this third generation. And I'm very hopeful about that. But I also think that perhaps a kind of inadvertent blessing inside of that curse is that now we all have a common language that we can speak, even if it's our colonizer's tongue. And the other day when we had a launch party here, and it was like, I've never seen a crowd like this anywhere, let alone in Ubud. It was the most fantastic, gorgeous, black, brown women, primarily women, primarily black and brown, Colombian, Mexican. It was glory. It was absolute glory. And I think there's a homecoming that is so important And I think there's also a coming together that is so important.
Thank you for tuning in. If you are enjoying this episode, do join our membership. For a small contribution, you can be part of our community, where we deepen the conversation and offer spaces of learning and embodiment. As a member, you are a patron supporting the making of this show, keeping the episodes full length, free and accessible for all. And you receive a number of benefits, such as monthly soul space, going deeper sessions, access to our library of workshops, and discounts on all our online and in-person experiences. Our membership is what makes us able to make this show and stay advertising free in a world that is always trying to sell us stuff we don't need. Head to allthatweare.org/membership to find out more and join today.
The map is extraordinary, and I love that you're bringing tech as well as the exquisite handicraft that's part of it, and so people will be able to scan and hear the stories themselves and kind of touch deeper into these stories. And Mallence, you said about the lion, and that we're so used to hearing only the hunter's version of events, and that there are so many stories that
hundreds, and the map will actually be a dynamic piece of art that will keep evolving. And now the movie Woman King was produced, I think, by Marvel, and it was an extraordinary success, but it's based on the story of the army of Dahomey women, right? A female army, or the throne Queen Yani reclaimed because the British wanted that throne, but that throne in the Akan culture, it can't even touch the ground. It's a spiritual item where they believe it came from the sky, but it's made of massive gold. And the queen demanded that it's handed over to her, and that broke out the complete war, because a lot of, I assume Indian culture too, but African culture is very warm, very welcoming. But then there's a certain line when you cross that. That's like war, and
We have no such line. We have no line, so we're gonna learn.
And Shaka Zulu, and then Queen of Punt trading with Queen Hatshepsut, among the most powerful empires or dynasties of ancient Kemet, was created by a woman, but we hear about all these male pharaohs. But when you see our map, you see a majority of women on there. And that's why I also think who tells the story dictates what the future will perceive. And because now the story is told by 3 women, you see a lot more femininity through it and a lot more beauty through it, That also shows how skewed history telling can become depending on who the narrator is. But it's the beauty in these stories, and it's a beautiful combination. We use original imagery. I mean, a lot has been documented, right? Because Indian artisanry is like exquisite, and in Africa, from the ancient temples, we have the Queen of Punt depicted with her very, voluptuous curves and so on. Then we have Queen Hatshepsut, we know what the Dahomeys look like. So we taken all these original depictions, and obviously the Golden Throne exists to this day. We've taken all these original imagery, and then Shilo with her amazing talent.
I'm an Aquarian, so
has nothing to do with her star sign. It has something to do with, I would believe, her lineage, her mother's artistry, how that then informed. I mean, I know many Aquarians know.
Well, we care a lot about our astrology and our lineage, so that's also part of it.
But I know a lot of Aquarians, they're not artistic, so I don't know.
Oh, we're not talking about that.
Okay, well, whatever the reason may be, she's incredibly talented and worked with incredibly talented artisans in her Palace of Winds in Jaipur, where her studio happens to be. It's an extraordinary piece of work that will grow, that people can learn from when they come in the near future. They'll be able to scan their phones over these objects on the map, and it will inform them with a story. So literally this space, while it's a physical space, ultimately we will be retelling history and her story. That's our mission here.
One of the significance of the map is the relationship between Indonesia, India, and Africa through the Indian Ocean.
Mm-hmm.
And we are here in Indonesia, and we have been talking a lot about India and about Africa. What is the significance of opening this space here?
That's a very, very beautiful question. I feel like what happens in a lot of spaces where tourism exists, and I also hate tourism, in all honesty. But I think what happens in a lot of spaces where tourism exists is that suddenly then the outsider becomes the person who receives, right? Is taking from that culture. And I believe that there needs to be another relationship that can be formed between Balinese people and Indian people and African people and other people from the global south, or other people who even have the openness to give and receive in equal measure.
When people have the openness to give and receive.
This is not a mission. This is not the purest, no white people and dogs allowed, though there were signs in India that said no Indians and dogs allowed. Let us remember and let us never forget. But this is an open space for people from all over. But this is especially an open space to invite Balinese people in. Very often in these service industries, you see Balinese people serving, you see them waitressing, you see them cleaning, but you don't see them included in the conversation. And I think a big part of why 1/3 of the profits generated from this space is going to go back into cultural regeneration so that we can bring Balinese community members in. I think also everything happens for a reason. And right now there's a huge conversation happening around kind of the Russian invasion. There were conversations about the Australian invasions into Bali. There's a lot of gentrification that is happening of the land itself. What happens in these sorts of moments where there's like a push and a pull, or there's anger around how land is being treated, is that actually those polarities and those divisions become even more sharp. And I think there's a way to be able to say, hey, we can exchange with each other. You don't have to, Balinese people don't need to isolate themselves completely. We can exchange with each other, but there's a different way that we can exchange. So yeah, I would say that's why this is the space.
It's time to show a different way, because people who don't know, like if you come from a culture where all your grandparents have been doing, and I come from that culture, while I present as a woman of color, my mother is white. My great grandfather was a Comte de Lanoutel, a general in the French army, and killed, led missions to kill my grandmother's lineage, and destroy these beautiful queendoms and so on. So I'm a product of both. I'm a living testimony, so I really speak on behalf of both. If you, however, only know one way, and that is the way of extortion, exploitation, and taking, and also grown up, we're raised with a lot of entitlement that we as Europeans hold wherever we go. We think what we say, and because of my skin color, I have a different experience. But imagine now I was white and that was all I knew. We think where we go and what we say, that's the law, that's the way. And that entitlement hinders Europeans of being open to really experience different ways, But we believe that many are waking up. They understand that is no longer the way in which they wish to operate in this world. They understand the concepts of karma. Actually, what you said before was a valuable question. Through, Shilo also mentioned, through colonization, we're all able to communicate, right? Through colonization, yoga has become, I would say, probably alongside football, the most famous, and I'm intentionally using the word sports, because how it's practiced in the West, it's a sport, it's not a spiritual practice. But that opens up conversations, right? It opens people up to at least the ideas, and so I believe there are a lot of Europeans who understand the concept of karma. They wish to kind of balance out the karma that their ancestors have, embedded in them, and they wish to explore new ways because they do not want to consistently perpetuate the same karma. That consciousness, that collective consciousness is awakening. And those people are people we wish to co-create with.
Yeah, I would also add that our cultures are full. We are like the other day at the launch party, we had these beautiful, voluptuous, scented goddesses, for the lack of a better word. And I know that there are lots of There's a lot of goddess culture out here in Ubud. There's Devi Darshans, the ex-white person. There's, all of these different goddesses, sort of self-proclaimed goddesses walking around. But our goddesses were wide hipped. They had conch shells covering their bodies. They came with tikas and sindoors. They came with their fires. They came with their ceremony. They came with as themselves. We're not pretending to be anybody but ourselves. And our bodies have also been colonized, right? The images that we see of women are very, very flat-lined, skinny-waisted sticks that can somehow walk. But our bodies had their own vocabulary. In Sanskrit, there's a word for this line that's formed underneath the belly. When a woman has a little bit of you've seen in all the sculptures in Khajuraho, we have a gentle belly. It's not meant to be something that's sucked in. It's meant to be something that can breathe. And there's a beautiful word just for that line. One of the words for pussy, for lack of a better word.
What's the word for that line?
I don't actually remember. Yeah. But one of the words for pussy, for the lack of a better word, was Chandan Mahal, which means the perfumed palace. Like, imagine if I grew up calling myself, or referring to my intimate parts as a perfumed palace. How would I feel about myself right now? I feel pretty good, right? Our bodies, the shame around our bodies is so embedded in us. But there is a kind of intimacy that even with our myths exists and continues to exist. The pieces of my body that you see here in some of the art objects, they're based on a story about Sati. So they say that Sati was married to Shiva, and her father was, very upset that she'd married this wild-haired, chillam-smoking god and didn't invite him for a yagna. And Sati was so upset that she jumped into this holy fire, annihilated herself. And Shiva picked up her burning body, and he took her back to her body back to Mansarovar, the lake of the mind. And they say that he was so hurt that his tears formed a lake in India. And I love it when these mythologies start to then kind of converse with the land and the geology of the land. They say that his tears formed a lake, and 68 pieces of her body fell across the Indian subcontinent, Sri Lanka, and some parts of Pakistan as well. And there's this unbelievable intimacy, right? It's like they say that where her navel fell, there's a temple. They say that where her left earlobe fell, there's a temple. Where her left breast, her right breast, her yoni fell is a temple in Assam. And so there's such intimacy with the female form in a lot of our cultures that is also completely colonized, because what we see is white women sell those bodies selling us everything. Or, for example, there's another text called the Rati Rahasya, which speaks to the changing erogenous zones in a woman's body based on the phase of the moon. So they say that, on a certain day of the moon, her left toe is most active. Again, it's like that. It's like left toe. It isn't graphic in any way. It is deeply poetic and deeply sensual. And I really feel like our launch the other night embodied that sensuality and that poetry and that abundance. And it was completely unapologetic for that.
And the artwork here, I would say, is also a representation of that decolonization of the body, because I feel every part of the world has been colonized by the white man, the European man, including the womb. As of recent, laws were made what a woman can and cannot do with her womb, in terms of abortion and so on. To this very day, the womb is colonized, right? It's a territory where men have raped and ravished, just as they've done with all the lands around the world. And when we look now, us nude, shame doesn't exist. I mean, here in Indonesia, you see in the villages, you see bare-chested women, just old women. They have no concept of the breast being censored. That's such an alien. In Africa, if I want to, there are certain places where I have to wrap my head, but I could literally be topless. That would be totally, when I work with my female communities of women in the villages, we are having this is female entrepreneurship. Half of them are bare-chested while we're doing the soaps and the this, that. That's just normal. Men are around. Even when we interview them, and you see the dynamics between the man and the female, there's no inkling of objectification, but just the respect for the elder, for the woman, for the female. And in all cultures that have a sense of spirituality and something primordial, the woman was the first god. Because at the time, they had no concept like that the men contributed through the semen. They thought women were just sometimes creating life, right? Until they got a heck of, okay, she has a cycle, and through penetration, they just thought women would create life, and in all cultures, females were the first goddesses, and when we look at Rawa's work, and the stones represent the heaviness, the burden that women had to carry. She's also reclaiming that shame-free, and Shilo too, these wearable temples, women were ejected and excluded of these places, and it's time that we reclaim our space behind the altar, whether that's Christianity, whether that's Hinduism, whether that's Islam, whether that's, all religions you can think of. We were behind the altar. There was no such thing. The earth was not informed with blood that was shed and blood that was taken, but blood that was given, our sacred blood. The menstruation has been colonized, it has been shamed, it has been all of that. There was no such thing. And like, shame is the lowest frequency. We just talk in terms of frequency. It's shame, it's envy, it's mischief, it's hatred. These are the lowest frequencies, right? And you know that from your spiritual practices. It's all about coming into your higher frequencies, or actually uniting the lower and the higher. We call it Smaitawi in the kinetic practices in yoga. You also have that. So these lower frequencies, women need time. It's high time for women to come into their godhead, into their power, and release all shame. And that can only happen if we reclaim our bodies, if we reinform the narrative around it, be that our menstrual blood, be that our vagina, be that our blood, our wombs, and so on. The perfume garden or the perfume palace, this is the standard, and it's such a beautiful color, and nowhere in the world is blood shamed, in no horror movie, and no accident will people say, oh, we don't want to go near, let him die, we're not going to touch him. No medic will say that, oh, cover him, we can't see the blood. But imagine a woman, you have now a stain. And in all honesty, I was just revisiting this, me and Shilo till the morning, we painting this at night, and I saw a stain of blood on her sari, and I thought, but color was all over her because there was paint. Only I knew, but I'm like, how powerful is this? She's painting this while she's on her moon, yeah? And I just watched this, and I thought it was just so beautiful, and we need to show
this. We
this.
feel so much shame around that, we're constantly.
But no more, no. This needs to stop, this needs to stop, because we're not coming with no nasty color. This is red. It's everybody's favorite color, no matter which culture red is. It's a beautiful color. It's not some brownish shit. No, it's red. We're not coming here with a piece of shit dripping down. No, it's red. And how beautiful did nature make it that this runs through our veins, where everything else doesn't have that color. It's
really nice. It's what we went on, and that's what red represents. Red actually represents blood, and the white represents semen.
Yeah. And in ancient African and Kemetic temples, it was not like, we know the Bible stories with Isaac, and suddenly there was human sacrifice, right? In Islam, you're familiar with that, like Eid and so on, when suddenly the lambs are sacrificed in representation of Abraham sacrificing his son, which I find very barbaric, to be honest. But originally that was never the case. It was only women who could offer blood, because for us, it's what we release every month, and then men took that from us as well. So, we can come with blood too, but we gotta kill. Who offers their own son? How can that now be a representation of something sacred?
And I will actually maybe divert a little bit, but take it back into shame. I was telling you the story of Yama and Yami earlier, right? And how by refusing Yami, Yama turned into Yamaraj, the lord of death, and she turned into the Yamuna river and fertilized the fields until she found her Lord Krishna's feet. So actually, Radha and Krishna are also often depicted, especially in the Pushtimar tradition, with Yamuna also there somewhere, but she's also always there. But that story is not that dissimilar from the story of Adam and Eve. But look at the way that story is completely embedded with shame.
Yes.
Eve is banished from the garden, completely erased. They say that actually, we're bringing it back to menstruation, but they say that
women are dangerous.
Is menstruation. And so that is the curse that. Now, with that as being the theosophical guideline of an entire society, of course there's shame. Of course we're ridden with shame. But these are not the stories that we were told. growing up either.
And these are not going to be the stories we will tell, and these are not going to be the stories that the future will hold. We are now here to reinform that, to destigmatize, to peel away, the layer of shame.
To reclaim our paradise
and reclaim the power of the feminine body, to celebrate the curves, the blood, everything that makes it possible for us to bring life.
This blood, So it's but every human being, if it wasn't for the period, it's an egg that wasn't fertilized. Let's also, the same man that shame it, this will be your child that you love to bits. So why should we be shamed for being creators? That's just sheer insanity. It's such a twisted concept,
But there's a beautiful story, and there are so many beautiful stories. Yeah. There's a beautiful story about Ardhanarishwari, right? And half man, half woman. But they say that Bhrigu, who was a saint, came to Shiva, and he was like a big fanboy. And I was like, can't believe that I finally encountered you. Like, I'm just so excited to meet you. Can I take a selfie with you? Like that kind of level of fanboy. And he was like, have you met my wife, Parvati? She's actually equal half with me. And he's like, oh yeah, Parvati, whatever. Shiva, I just love you and adore you. And they say that actually Shiva and Parvati merged forms so that any time that Shiva was remembered, Parvati was never left behind.
And the same story now. I'm actually sad they called it the woman king, right? Or they call Hatshepsut to this time. They say she was hiding behind a mask to operate as a pharaoh. I mean, how can you rule a dynasty for I don't know how many years, and you were hiding and nobody knew? That's just pathetic. That again comes from the so-called Egyptologist white male gaze, right? But the woman king, I mean, why not the queen? End of the story, right? Because in that culture originally, the woman and the man would rule side by side, and it was the women that reclaimed the lands back and abolished the slave trade there, because they started trading humans with the Portuguese, and the women they were superbly trained, and they went into battle and they reclaimed it, and she was throned alongside with the king, because they realized only in that unification of the male and the female rule, can they obtain victory.
There are 100 stories, and there are 100 stories about every story as well. So the same image or the same god may have 10 different tellings of it, which I also love. There's another story about Annapurna Devi. So they say that Shiva emerged out of a deep meditation after centuries of sleep, in a sense. And he turns to his consort and Lord Parvati, and he says, all of this here, everything is illusion. Everything is Maya. Nothing exists but Maya. She was like, Acha, I've been taking care of the people, I've been feeding the world, I've been fertilizing the fields, I've been pollinating the flowers, I've been, rice, abundance, fires, getting the sun to rise, getting the moon to set, like all of that. I've been doing all of that, and you think all of this is illusion. Bye. So she leaves him and she goes off. And when she leaves, when Parvati leaves, the entire world comes to a standstill. All sinners, all sadhus, everybody starves. So there's a beautiful image of Shiva sitting in front of Parvati, literally with a begging bowl in his hand, saying, please come back. And she's just offering him like a handful of rice, like, okay, fine, I'll return. Yeah, I think this is, we're tapping into multiple things here. We're talking about feminine energy. We're talking about culture, legacy, ancestry. We're talking about reclaiming our knowledge systems. I think it is an abundant space that we're creating here.
I would say, to wrap up, everything returns to the origin at some point, and we see humanity is returning to the origin. Cultures are returning to their origin. And often that comes from the juxtaposition of being pushed apart. There's an even greater pull that happens, back to the origin. And we will lead and ignite in part that returning to the origin, and actually mapping that into the future.
For everyone that is here listening to this, or that's coming into connection with this space, what is a call to action, a way of embodying this experience that can then be taken out into the world?
That's a beautiful question. I think, again, perhaps the embodiment can happen in the way that we speak, what we wear, authenticity,
truth,
delight, joy. Joy is a form of resistance. Joy is a form of reclamation.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say, that embodiment.
Yeah, not fearing to embody the truth.
Mm-hmm.
We're often so scared of the truth because it rattles things and but growth lies outside of the comfort zone, and everybody who understands that is actually ready for growth. Growth doesn't happen within the confinement of the comfort zone. So
that we know.
I was brought up a Gandhian, right? So, and I know that Gandhi's politics have since become quite problematic and all of that, but
not in the Western understanding yet.
No, actually, particularly in the Western understanding as well. Yeah, I think so.
I find people often still
in Africa
hold Gandhi up,
taken down, and so on.
Yeah, but also they were living in that moment where there was a certain discourse that was present in that moment. We have to build upon those ancestral dreams, not take them down. But he did say, "Satyamev Jayate," the truth shall prevail, and I believe that the truth will indeed prevail.
And one final thing, which is, we talked about the yogis, the spiritual seekers of the West that may find themselves in places like Bali that are, or in London and New York and around the world, and that are finding a connection to these practices, that are finding a connection, perhaps even to being teachers and offerers. What is the call in?
Responsibility,
exactly. And it comes from authenticity.
Accountability.
If you really seek to be authentic, then accountability and responsibility will be part of your practice. And then you will not shy away from us. You will not shy away from these conversations. I hold women retreats, and I have women coming from all over the world, and women who are part of the colonizers' nations. And we literally have women from all continents coming together, and everybody that knows me knows I'm very honest. Some even call it brutally honest, because to some people they're not comfortable with it, but it formed the most profound relationships for years and years to come, regardless of your background. If you're willing to step into that zone with us, something really magical and profound and strong can happen and grow out of this. And those who are ready, they're ready, they know, and those who are scared, okay, that's fine too, maybe then you just, get your toes wet a little bit. But yeah, we'll have a lot of conversations. We will be inviting a lot of practitioners from the actual lineages, be that Kemetic yoga teachers, Indian yoga teachers, meditation teachers. We will bring in so many practitioners from the actual cultures that these practices originated from. And for some that might be novels, for some that might be, oh, wow, that's different. Not experienced and seen it, but you'll see that.
I think also, there's a soft invitation, and I'm also seeing a lot of, like Mallence said, boundaries being drawn. In the art world, for example, there is a huge movement around repatriating objects that were stolen, be it the freaking Kohinoor on top of the Queen's crown, which somehow irritates us so much, or entire temples were taken out. Yeah. You can see the gates of Isis in the British Museum. So there is a conversation happening around repatriation.
It's in the Louvre.
Yeah, there's a conversation happening about repatriation in spaces like COP27, and in the climate justice world, there's a conversation about loss and damage. Countries in the global north have to give back or pay back countries in the global south for the damage that's being done, be it the Pakistan floods or floods in Bangladesh or whatever it is. I think with this space as well, this is a softer space. It is an invitation, but it is time to give back, and it is time to give thanks. So,
and reverence, yeah.
If people want to come, they can, I guess.
And final question.
Yeah, it's never ending.
What is an embodied decolonization in a kind of bigger picture, a bigger vision from this space?
I pick up on the word submission, because colonization forced everybody in submission. And we've all, to some extent, become submissive to the Western dictatorship that dictates how we're supposed to think, how we're supposed to feel about our bodies, how we're supposed to look, how we're supposed to speak, how we're supposed to eat, what is presentable, what is acceptable, what is considered educated, as long as we all formulate and echo that same narrative. But however, when we dismantle the word, it's sub and mission, And we're defining a new mission, and that's going to be the movement, right? So we're on a mission. We're on a mission of reclamation, resurrection, regeneration, equality, harmony, femininity, masculinity, all these beautiful things and dynamics that make this world go round and will make this world go round, regardless of movements and AI and trends and so on. As I said before, everything ultimately returns to the origin. The universe is nothing but a spiral. And we come back to the same point, but on a different ladder of the evolution. So submission, we're redefining that. We're on a mission. We're just redefining the mission that we're on. And it's no longer a patriarchal, Western, white lens.
And we can keep adding, but I think
I was glad I asked the final question. That was beautiful.
Yeah.
It's a wrap.
All right,
It's a wrap. Thank you for listening. We hope that you have enjoyed this episode and it has sparked some inspiration and creativity in you. As always, you can find links to everything we mention in this episode, download our book, and discover so much more over on allthatweare.org. We give space to our guests to share their perspective without debating it or fact-checking, as this approach allows for deep, unedited conversations from the heart. We trust your discernment and wisdom to take what is useful and challenge what isn't in your own understanding. We offer spaces for discussion and integration in our membership community, which we would love for you to join. We don't believe in selling you things you don't need through this podcast, and so it's made possible by you, our beautiful community. If you loved this and would like to connect more deeply with us, please join our membership. You choose what you contribute based on our sliding scale, and you become a patron whose support makes this podcast happen, as well as receiving access to a library of many resources and invitations to nourishing events. Please also hit subscribe and leave us a review wherever you listen so others can find us. This podcast is made by an all-female global team. Me, Amisha Gadiali, producer and host, Anna Greta Folderbach, who crafts the words that accompany each episode, and Mary Chan, who edits the sound so skillfully. All That We Are celebrates all that we are already and the untapped potential that lives inside us. It invites the full power of the more than human world, nature, the unseen, our ancestors and our future generations. It reminds us that we never exist in silo, through borders, timelines, or polarity, that in each and every moment, all that we are is here.